And welcome to Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, episode 180. Good number for a darts fan. Today we're going to be looking at the notion of filling the frame. Let's explore that idea. It sometimes crops up as a photography competition title. What does it mean and how can you respond to it? Also, we have two people, Nurije and April, have both sent in images for feedback. Also I'll keep you up to speed on what's happening with the Smug Points Leaderboard. So if you happen to be watching live, leave a comment. Let me know you're here, which is worth 5 Smug Points in itself. And we'll make a start. So yes, welcome to episode 180 of Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres. If you're looking to improve your understanding of photography, well, you're in the right place. Make sure you like, make sure you subscribe, make sure you tell your friends all about it. So today we are going to be talking about the notion of filling the frame. Yes, and just a quick update on the Smug Points Leaderboard. So for anybody who's been who's missed out on the first couple of episodes of the year, one of the things I decided to introduce was the notion of smug points, and really they're based around the idea of interaction, of being a part of the community. So you get a different amount of smug points depending on how much you contribute to the community. So if you are, for example, putting in an image for the critique section, the feedback section, and I select it for giving feedback, that's worth 25 points. If we're doing a challenge and you happen to stick an image in for the challenge, that's worth 10 points. You even get 5 points for turning up here and saying hello. Just the once though per so there's a kind of an encouragement for anybody who's lurking who hasn't quite got around to saying hello, but you'll find that actually the regulars here are a pretty friendly bunch, so do say hi. If you don't happen to be watching live, but you're watching on catch up, and there are 179 other episodes you can catch up on, then you please click and like any of the previous episodes that you watch. Yeah, you can also leave comments as well, little bits of feedback on how you felt the podcast went or anything you gained from it. Also, always welcome. I can see we've got comments in already, so let's see what we've got. Well, April says, greetings to us. From a sunny and freezing Long Island, New York. Susan says, good afternoon from a wild and windy Kakubri, but I've got hot chocolate. Well, if you've got hot chocolate, it doesn't matter what the weather is really, unless you happen to be sitting outside with it, mind. Meg says, hello everyone. Nurije says, hi everyone from a windy Exmouth in the UK. Maggie says, yes, definitely a hot chocolate day, if only I had some. It's true, because here in Castle Douglas, it's just 9 miles along the road from Susan in Kakubri. It is wild, wet and windy, quite brutal out there at times. Nadia says, hi everyone. I think Nadia's up in Fife in Scotland. Peter says, hello from a stormy Annan. Hege says hi. Janet says hello from a chilly, sunny Mississauga. -9 now. 9 degrees C. Well, that's cold. Warming from colder days through the week. Not cold enough to freeze soap bubbles at my break time from work, though. Yes, I was mentioned last week the idea of blowing soap bubbles and then them freezing when it's cold enough, and then taking photos. April's welcoming Hege. Marilyn says hi all from a sunny but chilly Colorado, and John says hello from Columbus, Ohio. That's great. We have people in, we have people saying hello, the chat is underway, we have photos to look at and ideas to explore. So let's make a start. So today I'm talking about the notion of filling the frame, and so this has come about from the idea that it is one of these competition titles, contests, especially if you're involved in some of the online contest sites like ViewBug or Photo Crowd, Guru Shots, some of the others. Very often you find that there are particular titles which crop up more frequently, filling the frame being one of them. Now, what exactly does filling the frame mean? There's sort of slightly different interpretations, but I'm going to go with one which is a kind of full filling it up, and I'll talk you through, I'll show you examples of what I mean with that. It does actually sort of strike the idea though that this is one of those things whereby if there are particular competition titles, or contest titles, which you are frequently entering, maybe not scoring so well with, or confused about what they actually mean, let me know. I'm happy to turn over some podcasts to this. Marilyn's been in contact with me this week to talk about the notion of still life, and she's struggling with a particular photo, but also some of the concepts. So while I'm not going to deal with her photo in this one, in about 2-3 weeks' time, I've decided I will revisit the notion of still life. I did do a still life podcast specifically devoted to it, but I've realised that's nearly 3 years ago that I did that. So time for an update on that. So if you have ideas, let me know. Email me. There's a Facebook group also called Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres. If you're not a part of that already, make sure you join it if you happen to be on Facebook, and leave me your ideas of what kind of podcasts you would like to see. A couple more comments coming in here as well. Susan saying she's seen loads of frozen bubbles this week on the internet. Stacey's joined us with very cold snow on the ground from a Friday storm. And then April, Stacey and Susan all having a chat. Right. So where was I? Yes, filling the frame. So what do we mean by filling the frame? Well, probably the best thing to do is show you what we mean by kind of not quite filling the frame. So let me, let's do that and do that. So this then, picture of a lime cut in half, and this isn't filling the frame. This is a kind of a containment type of photo. You don't need to look beyond the photo, you don't need to look outside the photo, and in fact the whole way the photo is designed is to keep you within it. So the edge, that whilst the frame is always, with every photo, unless you've literally cut it out, when you look at a screen, your screen is giving you a frame, and then we are framed within that frame with a square or rectangle of some kind, which goes to the edge. So in a way it's full, it's not blank, there is bits of out of focus table in the background. In a way, the real frame of this tends to be the outer edge of the lime itself. So when we talk about filling the frame, we're not talking about filling the frame of the lime, we're talking about filling the frame of the photo. So actually, if I was to take this and I was to move in and move in and move in, now we get to a point whereby you can't see the outer edge. This is filling the frame. So what happens, there's an interesting thing that goes on here. Now at this point we can kind of still probably work out what it is, especially if you've seen the line beforehand. But this is almost the opposite of shadows or silhouettes. In a shadow or a silhouette, and I've done podcasts on both of those before now, but I've talked then about the notion of the shadow or silhouette. You have an outline, but you have no middle. So you're trying to guess what the center would be from the shape of the outline. Does it look like a person? Does it look like a hand? Does it look like a signpost? But you don't actually have any detail. This, on the other hand, is where you have the detail, but you have no edge. And without the edge, you come to realize that the brain is very good, tends to have different parts. You use different parts of your brain for interpreting things and putting them together. You've got one part of your brain designed for outlines. You've got another part of your brain reserved for or working out content, if you like, inside the outlines, and we tend to marry the two of them together so quickly we're not even aware we do it until one of those is missing. If the center is missing but we still got the outline, we have a silhouette or a shadow quite often, and the brain's trying to guess what it is. And when we don't have an outline, the brain is also trying to guess what it is. Sometimes their clues are strong enough so that and this citrus fruit, probably not too difficult to work out. By comparison then, actually I'll go back, let's do this. So here's another example then of a flower, in this case a tulip, and anybody who saw the picture that I put up promoting today's podcast, this is the one that I used. So we've got a shallow depth of focus, we've got a tulip, we've got raindrops dripping down on the top. Nice pretty photo, but again it's contained within the frame. We can see all of the edges of this, and in fact actually there's even a bit of vignette around it, and everything is drawing you towards the shape and the content. So it's not filling the frame. Now, sometimes, though, I will say, when you're looking at some of these competitions online, you will find people, some pictures scoring quite highly that still do have a part of the edge. Now, what they might do is something like this. So they've moved in close, and maybe you've still got a little bit of outside, not huge amounts. To a certain extent, that kind of depends on the content. You tend to find people get away with it slightly better, say, with a close-up picture of a kitten or a baby, something which has content which makes people like it or know what it is already, will sometimes score a little bit more highly. But if you're kind of being a bit more strict on the idea, what we really need to do is go to a point whereby we have lost the outer edge. And so this is filling the frame. We filled the frame so that you no longer have the outline to give you the... So is that making sense? I hope it is. I hope it's kind of making a start on it. What is what I've got here? April says beautiful tulip. Thank you, April. So let's run through some more photos then that have maybe been designed specifically in mind. Where what I've done, because essentially, if we're talking about removing the outline, there's two ways you can go about this. One is you can move your camera in so that there is no outline. The other is that you've taken your photo and then you crop it in. The problem always with cropping in is that you are losing pixels. Now, this is fine, generally speaking, if you're using a high resolution camera and the picture is only ever going to be appearing on the web, then you can lose quite a lot of pixels and still have a reasonably sharp photo. If you are ever intending to print up the photo though, if you say it's more of a camera club competition where you're expected to print it out and mount it to put in for the competition, then you need to make sure you're not getting rid of any more pixels than you absolutely have to. You want to have maximum levels of resolution. So that idea of cropping in or afterwards is something that you kind of do as a second resort, not as a first. What's that? Oh no, it's okay. Stacey is still chatting with some of the others, I think. So let's give some examples then of where are we? So right, so this photo of this P&E, I actually took close up. So this is where your macro lens, if you happen to have a macro lens, comes in really handy. Designed for getting in close. And in this case, this P&E, it's just before it's opened, it's just starting to open up, and you've got the layers within the layers within the layers. In a way, you've frames within frames within frames, but because we don't have the outer frame part, it still would happily fit under the filling the frame label. So likewise then, this one here, we've got dandelion. Nice close-up picture of the dandelion centre, the dandelion clock. We've got all the detail of the seeds. It's blurring out in the bouquet of the words, the seed heads. In a way, it's a kind of, it's this central part. We're using the whole of the dandelion to kind of back it up. It does still count as fill the frame. Some people might say, well, actually, the middle part is, and what you would really need to do is do something like this to fill the frame, except for the fact that that isn't what I'm photographing. And I think you can, because we don't actually have the edge of the dandelion, you can kind of get away with that. Other option then, say something like this frosted leaf. Again, macro, really good for something like this. So again, without the edge, I mean, we recognise the notion of the veins of the leaves. We know what it is, but we don't really know what the outer shape of the leaf is. So, you know, those are kind of things that you can kind of play around with as well. So if you have a macro lens, the macro lens really helps with the idea of for doing this kind of filling the frame, because you're naturally getting it right in close. in a way that sometimes if you've got a more conventional lens on or non-macro lens, there's usually, you'll have a limit from anything from this far away to this far away before you can get in focus. So if you're wanting to photograph something small like a flower or a dandelion head, you can't get your camera close enough without it and still be able to focus. So that's where your macro lens comes in handy. Whereas a zoom lens zooming in from further away, you might still have to crop in afterwards. Right, what have we got? I didn't catch that earlier, Stacey. I'm sorry for your loss. We also have so April says, I enjoy this abstract peony. Stacey says, I love the centre of the dandelion. I tried to do a fill the frame shot a few days ago. Used the wrong lens. Yeah, yeah. That's part of the problem. Is you kind of if you stand further away, but you've got a zoom lens, sometimes you can get in closer with that. But if you've got a prime lens, unless you've got a macro level of lens, you probably won't be able to get in close enough. Okay, other options then. So sometimes you can play around. I mean, it doesn't take a lot to do. I mean, this one. I think I used a conventional lens for this one. It gives a nice kind of dew dripping spider's web. And I do have part of the outer line. But here you don't have to go in very far, just like that, something like that. And immediately you've managed to kind of do a fill the frame part of it. And then you can kind of decide whereabouts within that. Another thing you can do is sometimes if you don't... I mean, when I was out, actually, just the other day, tree bark. Okay, so, and I did this one on my phone. So happened to there's lovely bits of tree. I just literally whipped out the phone. I thought that was interesting. Held it up, kind of a little bit back and forth until I knew I could be in focus, and it happily filled the frame. And at this point, you're getting into kind of lovely textures as well. But it doesn't just have to be confined to things. Sometimes you can do this kind of fill the frame with animals. In this point, it's a horse, if you know anything about horses. We've got an eye, we've got part of the plaited mane, we've got part of the bridle. What's that bit that comes down the side of is that the bridle? Something, I don't know, my horse, that doesn't quite sound right. Reins. Part of the reins? I should just not try and even start the conversation. Somebody else can correct me. Tell me what the tartan bit is going down the cheeks. But anyway, point being is that this is where a fill the frame with an animal. You get a horse, your cat, your pet. Harder to do with a goldfish, say, unless you happen to have a good macro lens. But any kind of animal of a reasonable size, you don't necessarily have to have a macro lens in order to be able to. But likewise, face, child's face, fill the lens so you're losing the outside of it. Other options are you can go in on things like this one was a willow platter, and what you're really getting is the texture. It really kind of brings out the texture. Another option here as well was a set of coffee beans. And again, what you've got here is this idea that what I've got is I've got a bowl of coffee beans, but I've not included the bowl. I've deliberately kind of cropped in. In this case, I've gone for a square crop because it happened to be in a round bowl and I was getting kind of to get the shape I want. And it's sort of, at this point, you're kind of almost into the sort of jigsaw puzzle level of things, but something you can do at home quite easily, whether it's coffee beans or lentils or baked beans or any kind of food item, or like I say, with given platters, plates. You will find loads of things around the house where what you can do is just remove the edge and you're nicely kind of filling the frame with that. There you go. Susan says, oh yes, Stacey says bridle, yes, and beautiful. April says beautiful horse, close up. Oh, John says it's a halter. April says question, if the spider was in the middle of the web, would it still be considered filling the frame? Yeah, now that's an interesting one. It's quite possibly not, because the spider then is the subject. And I suppose really that's a really good point, because that helps with the definition. What is it you're photographing? What is it that's filling the frame? Comes down to it's the subject that's filling the frame. Now, if the subject is the horse, then the horse's head happens to be filling the frame. If the subject is the web is filling the frame. If there's a spider in the web, the primary subject tends to be the spider. Unless there's something else about, really it's about the web and the spider happens to be incidental. In which case, as long as the subject is the web, then it's a case of you can fill the frame with the web. But that's a really good point, really good question there, April. So yeah, I think that's, hopefully that makes sense. Susan says, my favourite lens is my macro, use it a lot. Stacey says, love the eye of the horse. And Susan says, so many different shades of brown in those coffee beans, love it. Yes, it's, again, part of the fun that you can have with things, things which you think of, whether it's coffee beans or lentils or split peas or kind of anything that happens to be sitting in the kitchen or lying around, Lego bricks. You can get all the ones of the same colour, but of course the shade and the shadow and the texture and everything starts to come out. So other things you can, oh, April says thank you, I was unsure. Okay, cool. Other things you can do then are, again, out for the walk, brick wall. So without the top of the wall, without the bottom of the wall, this could be anywhere on it. What I happened to like about this was the fact that the part of it was sort of sitting under a tree, and over the years little kind of speckles and bits of stuff have come down, and we ended up with this kind of diagonal line of kind of where you've got the kind of green licheny mould bits on the left, but you've still got the red brick on the right. And I quite like, so you could also put this into actually a diagonal competition, although maybe not so many people would see it unless they were really looking for it. Likewise, other textures, stone wall. This one again done yesterday, just out with my phone camera. And by getting rid of the top part and the bottom part, again, you're not sure how tall the wall is. It just becomes a whole mix of texture. When you're getting into texture, wood is another great one. Planks of wood, I mean, this is the side of a building where all the paint happens to be peeling off. Again, no external reference point. Other fun ones, logs, all piled up there. Logs are always a great one. For some reason, this one always tends to score much higher than other photos of a similar kind of thing that I've got. This one always does better than the coffee beans, even though personally I prefer the coffee beans. In things like PhotoCrowd and Guru Shots particularly, I tend to find for some reason this one of logs always scores quite highly. Or for that matter, down at the beach, you turn around, you look straight down, you can have pebbles. Now, but there can be a problem. While some of these might look like interesting jigsaw puzzles, sometimes you can kind of come across, like, you can do something, so you take a whole mass of twigs, and you've got lots of texture here, but it does come a point where you go, well, it just feels a bit of a mess. You're not necessarily having anything which is drawing the eye. It's too many lines going in too many directions. So sometimes this is something, this kind of a balance. It seemed to work with the coffee beans. It even seems to work with the tree trunks, or the cross sections of the logs, rather. Some textures work, some don't. And something like this, I think, then just becomes too busy, and you can't really do much with it. So sometimes, if you're doing something like this, where we've got all these leaves. Ivy leaves mostly, I think, and something else, not sure. No, that's not ivy. That's ivy down there. This is something else, I think. Anyway, whatever this happens to be. In this case, what helps with something like this, I think, is the fact that we have the branch coming down here, creating a little diagonal. There's also another little branch around here, and then we have the kind of flower ends kind of coming out, adding bits of texture. And then there's a very slight bit of depth here, whereby it's sharper on these ones near the front, and it's starting to go out of focus as you kind of go slightly further back into the depths. And so that kind of gives much more of a sort of sense of depth going on, but also a sense of this, we're aware that there's a kind of whole diagonal that runs up to the right here as well, of the leaves. And so this, filling the frame, texture, green, whole number of different potential ones that this could come under. So that's one of those things, is you can kind of do the you can grab the textures, but you have to kind of, there needs to be a certain level of judgment as well. Look with your eye and go, is there something kind of aesthetically pleasing about that, or is it just kind of a bit of a mess and I can't really make much sense of it? And it's always tricky. One person can make sense of something that somebody else doesn't. So there's no guarantee just because it appeals to you that it will necessarily appeal to anybody else, and vice versa. But certainly worth keeping that in mind, that when you are sometimes without the edge of something, it becomes really interesting, and sometimes it just becomes a little bit too confusing. So it's about trying to work out that balance. Nurije says, like the wall and the colours, and the succulent plants seem to work quite well too. Okay, now everything I've shown you so far pretty much has been shot face on, and that's one of the it's one of the kind of ways of so whether it's the coffee beans or it's the logs or it's the stone walls, but sometimes you don't necessarily have to do it quite as straight on. So if, for example, a couple of years ago, I think it wasn't last autumn, I think it was the autumn before, I was out and there were leaves strewn, or big pile on the over in the park. They hadn't actually been cleared up or rotted away yet. They were starting to, and whilst there were patches of green around, again, this was just done with my phone, just getting down to ground level. We had all these wonderful leaves in the foreground, and they just sort of seemed to disappear almost forever. And so I just, by tilting the phone backwards and forwards a little bit until it filled the frame, so we end up, we've got the large leaves all in the foreground, and they get smaller and smaller and smaller, and they get more and more out of focus as it disappears into the background. And so again, you have no sense of how much there is. Now for me, I know I was tilting it right, trying to get as much to the edge as possible, just quarter of an inch beyond the corner here, you're going to start seeing grass. But because when we look at it, you can't see the grass, you automatically kind of fill in the details and assume that it goes on forever. Another example of this, trawler chains down at the fishing port. Part of the trawler chain sitting there, and again, you kind of get in close, and you can they're going away, but you can kind of tilt your angle. Now, again, so far, most of what I've shown you tends to be close up. There's the macro, or there's just getting in close, but you don't necessarily have to be close. You can be at a distance as long as you can isolate. And something like this, I think, becomes quite fun. Rooftops. If you can get up high, if you happen to be in this was at Whitby in northern England, and there's a big hill that you go up, and as you go up the hill, you can look down, and you've got all these houses around, and you can just kind of isolate the rooftops. Now, if you are strictly speaking saying that, say, the clock tower is your subject, then that's not filling the frame. But in this case, this clock tower is slightly off to one side, and I feel is part of the whole picture. The picture isn't just about the clock tower. The picture really is about the rooftops and all the shapes and all these kind of lovely diagonals and shadows and what have you. And so, because we can't see the edge, we can't see where the road is, we can't see where the water is, we can't see where the tops of the roofs are disappearing over here. This also kind of counts as a filling the frame, and certainly I've seen in some of the kind of on-site competitions, good set of rooftops can usually score quite well as well. Another one is this sand dunes. Okay, this happens to be, for some of you, I'm sure I've done a talk before various times, talked about a time I went out to Morocco, to the Sahara Desert, and again, most of the photos are of you're seeing the dune. You want to have the top of the dune, you want to have the sky behind it to get a sense of scale and what have you. But again, if you kind of remove the top of the dune, what you have is just the beautiful lines and shapes and texture, and there's a feel to the sand. Something about the smoothness and the texture and the wind-blown organic shapes that you get to it, which are really quite fun and interesting. And so isolating that again becomes interesting. What have we got? Oh, Hega says, my grasshopper photo could be a good example for the spiderweb situation. I started to photograph the flower but put the grasshopper over. Both the flower and the grasshopper is the main subject. This is true. In fact, actually, let me just go and see if I can find Heger's picture here. Let's flip back over here. So this was Heger's picture that he put into she. Oh, this is a terrible one, Heger. I'm terribly sorry. I haven't actually checked your sex, gender, or how you prefer to be called, known by. Apologies there. Let me know in the comments. So this was one which says, even though the grasshopper doesn't fill the whole frame, the colours of the flowers are so strong that it doesn't quite work as the air around the grasshopper. I feel this is filling the frame photos, but not 100% sure. And it isn't really a filling the frame photo. It's a close-up photo, it's a macro photo. It's interesting that you have the grasshopper, you've got the flower, there's also a red background here, which could be another flower. And so but what you've got here is a mix of subjects, and you've got the grasshopper as one subject, the flower as another subject. Neither of them completely fill the frame. Neither of them is incidental either. You've got two subjects, neither of which completely fill the frame. Now, if you had the flower filling the frame and the grasshopper was incidental, then that would maybe work. Or if the grasshopper was pretty much filling the frame, then that would work too. But this, I think, if you were going for a kind of a strict definition of filling the frame, and you were to put this into a filling the frame online competition, I think you would probably find that it wouldn't work as well. You probably just wouldn't score so high with it. Now, that would score really highly in something like a nice bright colours, primary colours, 3 colours, that kind of contest, where you've got the green, the yellow and the red. So very often with a photo, it's about understanding which of the titles your photo is going to fit best into, rather than necessarily trying to shoehorn something into which isn't necessarily going to score quite as well. Oh, Heger says, it's a female name here in Norway. My apologies, Heger. Okay, so the red part is part of the same flower. Fair enough. Okay, I get where you're coming from, but because it's not so obvious that, and so the yellow part of the flower is so strong, again, I think it's not necessarily, if it wasn't obvious to me, it's not necessarily going to be obvious to anybody else who hasn't seen it without standing back and looking at it. Their only reference point is the photo itself. That's where, I mean, you kind of got to kind of be slightly careful on where the definition, or where you're feeling the edge lies. Okay, other options then, just to run into the last couple, and then I will come to and start doing the feedback session for April and Nurije. But another thing you can do that's sometimes fun as well is just your local supermarket. Just, where are we? If I do that and that, this this kind of thing, in a way, is a bit like the logs or the pebbles. You've got kind of repetitive bits. Now, because it's designed so that you're not actually seeing the very top of the shelves and you're not seeing the floor, and it's spilling over, very carefully here, you make sure that the edges cut through part of the coffee. In this case, this is coffee shelves we got from Illy Coffee, Taylor's, Costa, Tesco's home brand. But I quite deliberately made sure that the frame cuts through the middle of the packets, cuts through the edges of the packets, the middle of the packets, so that you're not creating a frame with the coffee themselves. You kind of, sometimes you've got to be a bit careful if you're wanting to really make it feel like it's spilling out of the frame. And that's really what the fill the frame feel is that you look at the image and it feels like it's going beyond where the frame is. Whereas if the absolute edges were there, then it doesn't feel like you're going beyond, so it's not really filling it in the same way. And then another one you can always have fun with, try and find one of these where they've got a whole stack of things. In this case, just Heinz cream of tomato soup, iconic label, just great one for red as well, this would be. Now, with this one, sometimes, I showed this one to Maggie. She said, oh, well, we're missing the marketing trick there, because I think what you're supposed to do is have the label on the front of all these. Obviously, they couldn't be bothered to, or none of the shelf stackers could be bothered to go around and turn all the labels towards the front. Possibly what you could do, if nobody's watching too carefully, is turn all of them away, but only have one of them pointing to the front, which could be kind of fun. Or you turn them all to the front, or you mix them up and half to the front and half to the back. It all depends how detailed you want to be with that. But again, this notion of, again, I'm making sure that I'm cropping through the middle of tins at the top and the bottom and at the sides, so that the tins, the edges of the tins, don't become a frame themselves. And then finally, then, just for a little bit of fun, this, I suppose, becomes slightly more borderline. What we have then is a fill the frame with sheep, but we are aware that there is a sheep, a single sheep, looking at us. And I have, in the editing process, I have darkened down the surrounding bits, highlighted the face, done little bits of texture and blur and stuff like that, in order to make sure that in amongst all this sheep, when you look at it, your eye does get drawn to the head straight away. Because in the end, all the other sheep are looking away, and this one's going, oi, look, bloke with camera. And so, in a way, you could say this is the subject. And so the subject itself doesn't fill the frame, but the subject is also all the sheep. So I think you probably could get away with something like this. A little bit of fun. But ultimately with these things, I would also say, really try, see what happens. Make a note of what kind of photos will get accepted best. Because the whole point of this fill the frame idea is essentially the online competitions. And, this is what this one is in response to. Because there's different aspects to photography. One is where we are trying to understand particular technicalities, get particular levels of composition, where we are wanting to be able to do something which you could print up, stick on a wall, and creates its whole kind of art piece in its own right. Sometimes what we're wanting to do is wanting to do documentary, create a strong story, narrative, all these kind of things. And sometimes what we're just trying to do is we want to score well in the online competitions like PhotoCrowd and Guru Shots and what have you. And for these things, then we have all these titles that come up and what ones are going to work best. And generally speaking, when you have a title, your first thing to do is just match the title as closely as you can. So if it's nearly filling the frame but not quite, generally speaking, it's just not going to score as highly, because most people who are voting on these are voting at high speed. They're scrolling through their phone or their tablet or their computer screen at high speed. They've got 50, 100, whatever that they're going to vote on. So they tend to take things very literally. And if you don't seem to fully match up on the literal thing, then very often you don't tend to score quite as well. So hopefully that then gives you an idea. Fill the frame. So what I've decided to do is I'm going to hold a fill the frame challenge. Okay, so next week we are having a fill the frame challenge. So what I would like you to do, bearing in mind everything I've been talking about, and to keep in mind the idea that you can go in close with macro, you can, but you can also do buildings at a distance. As long as you've not got an outline, really, to whatever it is, to the main subject, then that will be a fill the frame. So what I want to do is set the challenge. I'll remind you again at the end of the podcast, but this is your challenge for next week. I want you to do so. Send me your images. If you're in the Facebook group, then plonk them in the Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres Facebook group. Put the image in. Tell me a little bit about the image, what it is, and what drew you to the idea of taking it. If you really don't have time in the next week to do it, but I'm sure you will have something that you can raid out of your archives. And then, or if you want to email me directly, kim@kimayres.co.uk will send me the image. And what we will then do next week is we will just go through the images and see how everybody's responded to this idea of the full frame, and hopefully become inspired by what everybody can do. So fill the frame challenge for next week, and every entry that gets put in, that gets accepted, will get 10 points, 10 smug points for entering. But then I will choose my top 3 as well, the ones that stand out best for me for whatever reasons. My favourite will get an extra 30 smug points, my second favourite will get an extra 20 smug points, and my third favourite will get an extra 10 smug points, over and above the 10 points you get for entering. So get yourselves going on the Smug Points Leaderboard. Oh, just a little reminder, actually, where are we with the Smug Points Leaderboard? Last week we finished, so Janet from Mississauga is currently heading the leaderboard with 60 smug points. Andy Holloway is currently second with 45, and then Sandra and VG are both equal third with 40 smug points each. However, given that it's April and Marilyn have sent in, not Marilyn, sorry, April and Nurije, who've sent in images this week. At the end of this will change around, so we'll have a new Smug Points Leaderboard positioning for next week. Okay, little reminder then that if you happen to find these podcasts useful, interesting or entertaining and you would like to support them at all, then buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres is one of the ways you can do it. Right, okay, a couple more comments here. April saying her husband's half Norwegian. Stacey says not Campbell's soup. No, not Campbell's, Heinz. April says creative sheep shot, and she's looking forward to the challenge. Hega says, then I will use the coin photo for the challenge. Ah, yes, well, I was going to say about the coin photo, the coin looks like it's got a kind of edge. What I would suggest with the coin is that you kind of crop off the top part a little bit further. Or go and take a fresh photo, get some fresh coins down from the top, or play around a little bit. Use the opportunity to really kind of explore, have a little bit of fun with it. And also say, the coins are from a board game called The Edge of Darkness. Well, fine, okay, that's great. Use them. Nurije says, looking forward to this. Got a few ideas already. Excellent. And it also says, I was shout out my name there, Kim. Oh, no, message retracted. Right, not totally sure. Maybe you're right. What you were going to write there, Rick. Right, okay, so let's move on then now. So we're going to go to the feedback section, and April and Nurije have both sent in images. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with April. Now, April, so let me just do that and do that. Now, April sent in this photo, and she said, I'm sending in this photo for critique. I was wondering if this Badlands photo shows the vastness of the landscape. My favourite photo of the year did not, but this is another from the photos that I took on the trip. So basically what happened was a couple of weeks ago when we did our best of 2023, April sent in this photo of the Badlands. I said it was an interesting photo, but one of the problems I had when looking at it was I'd had no real sense of scale to it. But you know, that was just a little comment, we thought about it. So what April has done now is she sent me a different photo from a slightly different angle to say, does this give a better sense of scale? The short answer to this is yes, it does. The slightly longer answer, which is maybe to try and make it slightly more useful then as a part of photography feedback, is to understand what helps to give a picture a sense of scale. And especially when you're in a landscape, well, it's not just the landscape. I mean, I was watching David Attenborough Planet Earth 3 where they were underwater, and they've got creatures, these bizarre creatures from down in the open ocean depths swimming past. And one of the things I found myself constantly wondering was, I have no idea how big these are. These creatures might only be, you know, 0.5 millimeter long, or they might be several meters. There was nothing to judge a sense of scale against it. And sometimes when we're doing landscapes, it can be fairly obvious, and sometimes it isn't. So things to take into consideration was when you're standing there, you're aware of the vastness, of the size, of the scale of whatever landscape you happen to be in. But you then are creating a photo to represent it, and the person who's going to be looking at that photo most of the time isn't going to have been standing there with you. Certainly not if this is something you're putting into a competition. Therefore, it becomes really important that you give people that sense of scale. If your primary feeling is the vastness of the place, the depth of the place, the distance that it disappears off to, then somehow you need to have things which help convey that. So what I'm going to do here is just going to run through a couple of little ideas of ways that you can convey a vastness of landscape. So one is you need to have something which places that we recognize. Now it can be trees, but sometimes you're in landscapes devoid of trees, like your is it Arizona Badlands? Anyway, the Badlands there that don't have any particularly trees to notice. Now something like this up on the Isle of Skye, we've got mountains here. How do we really know how big they are? Well, we've got a cottage in the foreground, and it's, if we zoom right in, it's kind of single story, but it's a double story, single story then with a extra story built into the roof itself. So because there's a door there, because there's windows, because that kind of cottage, certainly if you're on Skye, very common kind of build, as long as you can tell that that's a cottage in the picture, then you happen to know, instinctively, you know how big a cottage is. And so that in turn, especially because it's in the foreground of the mountains, automatically gives us an anchoring point to go, oh, okay, those mountains must be pretty big. It's not just a couple of large rocks, stones or something that are being thrown onto the ground which have got a bit of moss growing over them. This is actually really quite big. Now, maybe it's not quite as big as the Rockies or the Andes or the Himalayas or the Alps or anything like that, but or even some of the ones up in Norway, but certainly in Scotland they're quite dramatic up on the Isle of Skye. So that notion then of something that you can anchor to. Now, it could be trees, it could be buildings, it could even be people to help give us a sense of scale. So that's one of the ways of doing scale. Another one is where you have something like a road or a river or something drawing your eye into it, and it gets smaller as it goes further. So something like this then, this one's taken in Morocco in the Dadis Gorge, and we have the road and it's going down and it's disappearing off into the distance along with the river that's running down through it as well. And because of the way your eye gets drawn, your eye's getting drawn in three ways here. It's getting drawn by the diagonals, the curve of the rocks of the gorge coming in, but also the road that's zigzagging down, and then also the river that's coming in. And even actually, if we do zoom right in, we've got a little car over here, and we've got a building just here. Although, to be honest, you don't tend to see those when you're mostly pulled back here. For the most part, it's the road that is giving you this sense of scale. The other way of doing it is sometimes it's about the haze in the air, the thickness of the air. And what happens is things that are further away, because there's more air, there's more particles in the air, maybe moisture drops or anything like that, it means that things in the distance tend to be hazier. They tend to have less contrast, they tend to be slightly fainter. The darks aren't as dark, the lights maybe aren't as light. And so in something like this, what we get is we get layers. And so we can see from here that because these bits are much darker, then we've got a kind of mid-range, then it gets lighter, then it gets paler again, and then there's even just a little paler bit at the top there. And that these layers then are giving us a sense of, we know that those mountains in the distance are much further away than the hill and tree line in the foreground. Okay, so that notion is another one. And then finally, you get something like this, whereby you're trying to combine all three. So what we have is we have a road that leads our eye into it. But this road here is disappearing. Up here is much, much smaller. Got a river running down here, which is smaller. We have these wonderful stone walls here in the foreground. These stone walls are very like the same stone walls that are down here with little bits of trees in. So they're quite, so we've got other trees here. They're giving us a sense of scale of the height and the sense of the mountains. And then finally, the fact is the mountains, being slightly further away, aren't as contrasted as the fields in the foreground and the bits of old bracken and walls and road and everything. Stronger contrast in the foreground, slightly hazier in the background. So a combination in this case of all three, of layers of haze and contrast, things to lock onto to give you a sense of scale, like trees or roads or rivers, and something to draw your eye down into the picture, which gives you that sense of scale as well. So with all those things in mind, I suppose maybe just flick back finally to April's one. The reason, what we're lacking here is an obvious sense of, I can't see a building to latch onto, or a person, or trees. There could be little shrubs of some kind, but again, there's no real sense of, it could be lichens if it wasn't that big. But what does help is the fact that we have very similar shaped rock formations over here and in the distance. So we assume that these rock formations will be the same size as the ones in the foreground. As such, they are smaller, therefore there's a much bigger sense of depth. Likewise, it gets hazier. You can see the contrast disappears the further back we go. So that in turn also gives us this sense of depth. So this then gives us a much better sense of depth than this one, where it's harder to get a sense of, I mean, these are slightly smaller than the ones in the foreground, but then they sit slightly higher. Are they necessarily the same? And also, it's not far enough away that there you get the haze depth, and likewise there isn't anything like a person or a building or a tree or something we would recognize to be able to latch onto. So go back to your original question, does this one give a better sense of the scale of it? Yes, I think it does, but that's the reason why. I hope that then helps April. Right, okay, couple of more. What have we got here? Oh, Peter says, I hope to have a go at Fill the Frame Challenge. Excellent. I look forward to seeing what you put in, Peter. Stacey says, nice mountain shots. Hego says, just caught into the background as well. I would consider to take or find another photo, but might not get the time. See what you can do. Stacey says, I need to get out there one day. I do have a plan. Oh, South Dakota, not Arizona. Sorry about that. Oh, Robert's joined us. Says, howdy all from a very cold Texas. Sorry for being late. However, you are here. You've made yourself known live in the comments, so you will get your 5 smug points. April says, beautiful scene. Love the sun and shadows. And it just goes on to say that road is amazing. What else? Stacey said, I wonder how old those stone walls. So, okay. Right, okay. So next on then, finally, we're going to move on to Nurije. Now, Nurije sent in this photo and said, took this one yesterday morning, or well, this would have been a week ago, was trying to catch the frost and the morning mist. I like the way it came out. With the only thing I'm really not happy with is the sky kind of ruins it for me. Is there anything else I could do to improve it or maybe crop it better? Okay, so Nurije sent in this image, and certainly when we end up with a nice kind of morning mist, frosty morning, great if you're out there with a camera. It's a nice bit of smoke coming out of a chimney up here and just sort of drifting around. We've got the frosted fields in the foreground. Just the frost seems to have just started to melt off on the path up here. See in the background little islands or headlands or whatever in the distance. Feels slightly contrasty to me, and that the horizon isn't straight. Surely you didn't think you would get that past me. However, Nurije has also sent in the raw file, which makes life a little bit easier for me. So what I'm going to do is talk you through a couple of options here. So what we can see here is the raw file. And so now it seems to me that if I go to, what are the options here in the effects, the dehaze, it looks like what you did, because because of the mist, it does mean that the islands in the background are virtually not there at all. My guess is it might be an equivalent, I don't know whether you're using Photoshop or another kind of program, but if I take the dehaze and I pull that strong over to the side, then we end up with something which isn't a million miles away, slightly different color shift. But the problem is I think that's maybe made the darks too dark, and we've actually lost some of the what's quite a nice bit of kind of misty bits to it. What I would suggest is if we go to the light here, if I do auto, what does that do? Okay, that's sort of pulled the highlights down. We could even pull the highlights down. You can see as I pull the highlights down, the sky, this horizon comes in a little bit stronger. You can pull the shadows up a little bit, get a little bit more thing out of the details. But then what I might also do is over in the effects, play around with the clarity touch and just sort of pull that in. And then that gives us, we still got some of the mist in the background. We've still got the hazy, sorry, the mist in the midground. We can now see the background, but we've not lost too much detail in the shadows either. So something like that. Actually, I think I might just bring those shadows up a little touch more, something like that. Okay, then what we could also do, depending on you've got more. This has got this raw file tends to have a slightly more yellow shift, but you want to have a slightly more blue one. So we can drag this backwards and forwards over here. But if I just sort of nudge it slightly to the left, it gives a slightly cooler blue, which is maybe what you were after. Now, first thing I will do is just straighten that horizon, because I get a bit OCD like that. So now with the straight horizon, what can we do with it? So if you're not happy with the sky, but you're pretty much happy with everything else in it, there are essentially two options, or kind of, three, but two of them are kind of the same thing. The first one is to crop out most of the sky. Now, it depends how important that horizon is. If you figure that horizon is important, then what we do is we bring it down, and maybe you only need just enough of the horizon to know that it's there, to be able to see those little bits of island and headland or whatever they are, so that if it happens to be a particular scene which you want other people to recognise, maybe people who live around there who would know this space, or people who've holidayed there, then perhaps you just have enough of the sky to know that the horizon is there, but not worry too much about having more of it in. And then if we maybe move that in here, because kind of the main bit here is what kind of grabs the attention first, I think, is the house with the smoke coming out the chimney. So that then is a cropped in version whereby the sky, if you're not so keen on the sky no longer bothers you. Another option is to actually get rid of the sky altogether. And if you were to say, actually what I really like is this house down here and some of the fields in the background, but in a way like filling the frame, we don't have an horizon line, and we pull this in something like this maybe, then this then becomes another way to kind of crop. And then maybe you want to play around with, now we don't have a bit in the distance, you could play around with the contrast a little bit more. Perhaps if I just very quickly go to camera raw with this, if you wanted, you could even add just a tiny touch of vignette, because we're not looking to the outer edges, and on the effects maybe a little touch of the clarity, a little bit more, something like that, just to nudge it. And we kind of come to something like that. And that's quite a kind of picture postcard kind of picture. What we don't have, though, is we don't have that horizon. We don't have what are obviously key landmarks if you happen to know this area. So that's one way of going about it. If you don't like the sky, crop it out. So let's go back to here where we've straightened the horizon. The other option then is to replace the sky. So I'm going to run through a couple of different options here. Now, one of the things you've got to be careful of here is how you replace the sky. I mean, one of the things you can do, for example, if I, let's just go back to, and I have seen things like that. You go, oh, love that sunset. Isn't that a beautiful sunset? So what I will do is I will copy that bit of sky. I will come around here. I will paste it on here. Let's just drag this up. Now I need to line it up with the horizon, somewhere like that, just to make sure I'm getting it right. Back on here, I will go to select sky, and yep, it's selected the sky. So now I can come back to here and I can hit a mask, get rid of the outline there, and hey, we have a sunset sky. And of course it looks absolutely appalling. Even though it looks absolutely appalling, I've still seen way too many photos that pretty much look like this, that people have just stuck in skies which don't fit. Not only is it entirely the wrong colour and everything else, the shadows also in completely the wrong place, because what's happening here, if we look down at the shadows here, the sunrise is obviously coming from the right of the picture, not the left. Or not behind. So the lighting is wrong, the colouring is wrong, everything about this is wrong. So what this means is if you are going to replace the sky, you have to be more subtle about it. Now, another option here is where what we do is we create, say, a colour. Great. So what we do is we decide, right, okay, we want a blue sky. That looks kind of blue. That will do. And if I create a new layer, pour in the paint bucket, and then again go back to here, select the sky, and then come back here and mask it. Well, again, it's not really looking that good. I can take the opacity and I can fade it, but it's sort of, the other thing about skies is they're not uniform. And that's one of the things to remember. So actually what we really want to do is we want to take the mask and we want to grade it if we're going to do anything. So I will take the gradient tool and go from black to white here. If you need to really learn about these things, there's hundreds of YouTube videos about on how to muck around with gradient and masking tools. But what I can do, I'll do that the other way around. I can do this whereby it sort of fades out, something like that. And so what you do is you don't, try and get it straight, you don't have it coming down to the actual horizon. You kind of create a general fade, something like that. And you play around with this, stretching it out until it kind of looks a little bit more natural. Oh, that's not what I meant to do, so we'll just do that. And that kind of gives you a bit of colour into here. Still feels a little bit false, to be honest. It's a kind of a difficult one to fill in the sky because maybe you need to change your colour blue. Maybe it's still kind of not right. Okay, so another option then is to take a texture. And so let's say let me open that one in Photoshop. So a textured sky can always be fun. So we take a sky like this, and maybe what we do is we grab a chunk of sky like that. I'll copy that. And we'll go back into here and paste the sky, drag it up to here, and then I will, well, again, we've got the problem of the edge. So we need to make sure that what we're really doing with the edge is creating a graded. So again, if I go back to the gradient map here and do something like this. So what we're trying to do is just make it pale on the horizon, because if it's not pale on the horizon, then it doesn't quite sort of fit with that. So we do something like that. That gives us a nice texture sky, but then again, the sky, the light in the sky doesn't really feel like it's fitting in with this. So really, what about if we were to try and get a sunrise sky? Okay, so what I'll do here is we'll take this one, open this in Photoshop, and this is literally, we have sunrise here. This was sunrise in the desert, and so what I'll do is I'll grab a piece of sky. Let's go from here. I won't go quite as far as the sunrise, but I'll go something like that, and I will copy that, and we'll go and we'll paste this one in here. Let's just remove that and drag this up now. Okay, a couple of things to bear in mind here. First of all is that the sunrise is coming from the wrong direction, okay? Because in our picture we've grabbed, the sun was coming from over here. In the picture below, the sun's coming from the other side. So what I will also do is I will go to Edit, Transform, Flip Horizontal. So at least the light hitting the clouds is coming from the same direction the way the light is hitting the trees, something like that. So we do that, but what we also want to do is have a graded map, so it sort of gets pale at the bottom again. So we're only, and then finally, I think with this, the colours are a bit too strong. That is a literal sunrise hitting the clouds, whereas the sun's a little bit higher in the sky at this point. So we might want to kind of take the vibrance, or so let me go vibrance here, and then I'm going to anchor it so it's only affecting the sky. And if I take the vibrance down a little bit, something like that, so there's maybe just a little touch of colour in the sky, maybe take the saturation down a touch, something like that. We've got lighter bits, we've got bits of cloud there. And I think at that point, we're now starting to get a cloud sky which is looking slightly more like it. Maybe if it still feels a bit too strong, we can still just take the opacity of it down a little bit, something like that. And now at this point, I think we've probably got as close as we're going to get in terms of replacing the sky. Whereas maybe people aren't going to think it looks like it's been stuck on afterwards. So the key things then to remember that if you're going to replace the sky are you have to have a sky which is sympathetic to the picture that you've got in there. So having a dark, broody sky when you've actually got sunlight isn't really going to work. You have to make sure that the light is coming from the same direction. So any light reflected on the clouds is going to be reflected from the same side as the light is reflecting on the land. And that you get the colour scheme right. So again, there's no point in having bright orange sunsets or sunrises if the ground itself is more of a blue shift and has that kind of cool blue early morning feel. So with a combination, and the other thing is, of course, is that in this case particularly, the horizon is naturally very, very faded. And so you really want to kind of fade it out so that any texture isn't really appearing at the point where it's interacting with the horizon. So you can replace the sky. There are programs out there where you just click a button and choose a sky and they kind of blend it in a little bit for you. Some of them could be quite good, some of them aren't. A lot depends on the particular starting photo you've got. Or you can go back to what we said at the beginning, which was to crop them in to minimize the amount of sky that you need. So I hope that gives you some ideas there, Nurije. But thank you very much for sending that one in, and I hope everybody else has found that quite interesting too. Okay, couple more comments here. Where are we? Okay, yeah, John's talking about the Badlands National Park. Stacey likes the landscape. Okay, looks like it's... Oh, right. Okay, April says, I enjoy it much better with less sky. Oh, Naria's laughing because she realises she hadn't straightened the horizon. Stacey says, I like it without the sky too. April says, much more realistic with the gradient tool. And Nurije says, I like the fading idea. Cool. Okay, so hopefully that's all made a bit of sense. Nurije says, I'll try and play with it later. If I'm not happy with it, we'll probably crop. Thanks for that. Okay, delighted that that was useful. So, thank you to Nurije and to April for sending those images in. And so, this pretty much brings us towards the end. Again, if you found these podcasts useful, interesting or entertaining and you would like to support them, then buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres is one of the ways you can do it. Another way you can do it is invite your friends along. Let's grow this wonderful community of ours. So next week we are going to have a Fill the Frame challenge. So I want you, if necessary, go back, watch the beginning of this again, flick through, look for some ideas. We're looking to fill the frame. So the subject of the picture needs to be kind of going out with the edges. We don't want to be able to see the outline of the subject. And that's what makes it interesting. This is the whole idea with the Fill the Frame. Hopefully a combination of what I've told you, but also your own experiments with this will help you to improve your chances of being able to score slightly better in any Fill the Frame contest that you happen to see on PhotoCrowd or Guru Shots or equivalents. Send me your image before next Friday. So this is the 21st today, so the podcast will be on the 28th. Try and get me your image on the 26th or earlier. The earlier the better. If I get too many, then I will actually have to select out, so you might not get, you might not be included. But do only send me the one image. Don't send me several. Just send me one image for it. Smug points awarded to everybody who enters. Extra smug points awarded to ones that I particularly enjoy, that I decide to rate my first, second, and third. I think that's pretty much about it now. So yes, get your images, either email them to me or put them in the Facebook group. And yes, and then the following week, what I'll do is after that, we'll go back, I'll do I'll do a feedback week, so if you would like feedback on your images in the same way that I've done helping Nurije with the sky, or talking about that notion of how to get a sense of scale with April, whatever your sticking points, whatever your problems, send me your images and I will do my best to help. So that's us. That basically brings us to an end. Thank you ever so much to all of you for turning up and commenting, and to April and Nurije for sending their images in, and I look forward to see what you're going to send in for the Fill the Frame challenge for next week. Take care. Bye bye.